Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Texas Podcast. I am your host, Gabe, and today we're going to be talking about the Grass Fight. The Grass Fight was a small battle during the Texas Revolution fought between the Mexican Army and the Texian Army. The battle took place on November 26, 1835, just south of San Antonio in the Mexican region of Texas. On October 2, 1835, Texas colonists attacked a Mexican force at the Battle of Gonzales, formally launching the Texas Revolution. After the battle ended, disgruntled colonists continued to assemble in Gonzales, eager to put a decisive end to Mexican control over the area. On October 11th, the disorganized volunteers elected Stephen F. Austin, who had settled the first English-speaking colonist in Texas, as their commander-in-chief. Several days later, Austin marched his newly created Texian army towards San Antonio de Bejar, where General Martin Perfecto de Cos, brother-in-law of Mexican President Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, oversaw the garrison at the Alamo. In late October, the Texans initiated a siege of Bejar. At 10 a.m. on November 26, Texan scout Erastus D. Smith rode into camp to report that a pack train of mules and horses accompanied by 50 to 100 Mexican soldiers was within 5 miles of Bejar. For several days, the Texans had heard rumors that the Mexican army was expecting a shipment of silver and gold to pay the troops and purchase additional supplies. The Texans had been fighting without pay, and most wanted to charge the camp and loot the expected riches. Burleson calmed the crowd and then ordered Colonel James Bowie to take 35 to 40 mounted men to investigate, but only attack if necessary. After Bowie recruited the Army's 12 best marksmen for the expedition, there is little doubt that he intended to find a reason to attack. Burleson managed to stop the entire army from following by sending Colonel William Jack with about 100 infantry to support Bowie's men. About 1 mile from Bejar, Bowie and his men spotted the Mexican soldiers crossing a dry ravine. This was likely near the confluence of the Alazan, Apache, and San Pedro Creek. Bowie's men charged the Mexican party, scattering the mules. The mounted forces briefly exchanged fire, and then both sides dismounted and took cover in dry steam beds. The Mexican forces counterattacked but were repulsed. In Bejar, General Cos saw the battle and sent 50 infantry and 1 cannon to provide cover so the cavalry could retreat to town. The Texian infantry had also heard the initial shots and rushed towards the battle, at one point wading through waist-deep water. They approached the battlefield during a lull. The lack of noise made it difficult for them to ascertain where the Mexican troops were, and the Texans were surprised to find themselves between the Mexican cavalry and infantry. As the Mexican troops began firing, the Texan infantry troops dropped to the ground. Colonel Thomas Rusk led a group of 15 in an attack on the nearest Mexican cavalry. As those cavalrymen fled the Texan infantry, they were able to scramble to cover. The Texan cavalry joined their infantrymen. Burleson's father, James Burleson, led a cavalry advance on the Mexican position, yelling, "Boys, we have but once to die. They are here in the ditch. Charge them." The Mexican artillery fired 3 times, driving the Texans back. 3 times the Mexican cavalry attempted to take a small rise to give the artillery better positions. They were repulsed. The Mexican infantry then attacked. Rusk wrote of the Mexican attack, "These men advanced with great coolness and bravery under a destructive fire from our men, preserving strict order and exhibiting no confusion." The infantry abandoned their charge when they realized that Texan James Swisher had led a band of cavalry to try to take the Mexican cannon. The Mexican forces then withdrew towards Bejar. 4 Texans were wounded in the fighting and 1 soldier deserted during the battle. In his reports, Burleson claimed that 15 Mexican soldiers had been killed and 7 wounded, while Bowie claimed that 60 Mexican soldiers had been killed. In his book, Texans in Revolt, The Battle for San Antonio, 1835, historian Alan Barr stated that only 3 Mexican soldiers had been killed and 14 wounded. Most of the casualties were from the cavalry companies. Burleson praised all of his officers for their conduct. Bowie received the most mention. The Texans captured 40 horses and mules. To their surprise, the saddlebags did not contain bullet. Instead, the mules had been carrying freshly cut grass to feed the Mexican horses trapped in Bejar. This prize gave the battle its name. Although the engagement, which historian J.R. Edmondson termed a ludicrous affair, did not yield valuable plunder, it did serve to unite the Texian army. Days before, the army had been bitterly divided and unwilling to risk a prolonged siege or assault. With their success at the Grass Fight, however, the Texan soldiers began to believe that although outnumbered, they could prevail over the Bejar garrison. The Texans believed that Cos must have been desperate to send troops outside of the safety of Bejar. Several days later, on December 1st, a handful of Americans in Bejar convinced Cos to allow them free passage from the city. Although they promised to leave the country, the men, including Samuel Maverick, instead joined the Texian army and provided information about the Mexican defenses and the low morale within the town. Buoyed after the Grass Fight victory, on December 5th, Texans launched an attack on Bejar. thus starting the siege of Behar. I want to thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time.